Hi, I'm Rumi Desai, editor of Move Smartly, and this is the Move Smartly Show. Today, we're doing one of our favorite features, the in depth consumer question segment we call The Situation. As we do every month, I ask my co host, John Pasalis, broker and president at Velocity Realty here in Toronto, to respond to the detailed questions that you are sending in about the real estate situations you're trying to navigate in your own life. If you would like to send in your questions to be potentially featured on a future show, please email askjohn@movesmartly.com. And if you want to set up a personal meeting with John about your more detailed questions in private, you can click the link below in our show notes or visit movesmartly.com/meet John. And if you find this show useful, please consider following us and leaving a 5-star review from whatever platform you are watching or listening to us from. We really appreciate it. And now on to the show. Let's get going. Hi, John.
Hello again. Looking forward to this month's situation. We got some good questions that came in, so it's going to be interesting.
Yes, I'm curious about your responses. So let's start with question one. Hi, John. We are first time buyers. As a couple, we earn 180K per year and have a 300K down payment. We are expecting twins and need to move out of our one-bedroom apartment. We want to spend no more than 500K for a home because we want to pay off our mortgage in 10 years. We are both in our 40s and don't want to take on a 30-year mortgage. We want to be able to save $1,500 per month towards our retirement. This means that we are likely looking to buy an older 2 to 3 bedroom condo. We are open to anywhere in the GTA up to a 1 hour commute to downtown. So, do you think this is possible? And where should we look? Thank you, Anjali. This is a juicy one. I want to know the answer.
So this is a great question. This actually was not emailed to us. This actually was from a viewer who watches the show on YouTube and sign up and met up with them for a consultation to go over some of their needs. And this just kind of all came out, of course, in our discussion. And it was interesting because what we kind of discussed was if they can go out and find a two-bedroom condo for $500,000, which is likely what you're not getting a home for $500,000 in the GTA. If they can find that and it is the type of home that they could comfortably live in, let's just say for 10 years or so, for the longer term, then that's great. All the power to them. If you can spend less on housing, that's great. And it allows you to do all the other things you want. However, if they think that the two-bedroom condo is something they're going to outgrow in, whatever it is, 4 or 5 years, that they're going to need a little bit more space, depending on how big it is. Is it better to get the home that they want, that they could live in for the long term, even if that means spending a little bit more, right? Because the more transactions buying, selling, needing to upsize in 3-4 years, if it's not enough space, there are costs associated with that, right? And all they're doing by getting the two-bedroom condo is like delaying that the eventual move to the home that they actually need to have two kids, which might be a little bit more than a two-bedroom condo. The other thing we talked about is this idea that they're actually like they're trying to do three things at once. Of course, that is a little bit challenging. That's constraining their home buying, right? And the first is this desire to pay it off in 10 years, which of course is incredibly hard. That's limiting kind of their home buying budget. Their desire to save $1,500 a month per year is constraining their home buying budget. And then they have this sort of constraint on what they can live in, based on sort of these other financial considerations. Is like, where are they going to live and what can they buy? And those things are in some ways kind of competing against each other, right? So, their question was, what is a reasonable budget to be putting towards savings? What's a reasonable budget to be putting towards housing? I don't have there are obviously, those are very personal questions based on people's life plans, based on people's retirement goals. But I think, what I mentioned to them is, I think what's important to find a home that you can live in for the long term. Like, you don't want to be moving in 3 or 4 years, right? That's not a good plan. There are costs associated with that. There's the headache of moving. You're better off finding a home that you can settle into for the longer term. And if that means taking on a slightly higher budget and extending your mortgage payments out to 20 years, maybe not quite 30, but 20 rather than 10, is it the end of the world? Like, do they have to have it all paid off in that time for their retirement? I mean, in their 40s, if it's 20 years, it's going to be probably close to retirement age anyways. So these are the sort of the things we talked about. And on top of that, when we think about the $1,500 a month towards retirement, they definitely want to, save money towards retirement. But again, I think they have to look at their own finances and what is that enough? Is that too much based on sort of their own housing needs as well, right? Because you cannot, at the end of the day, you need a home to live. You need a home that's big enough for your family. So you don't want to max out on your home so you're not saving anything towards retirement, right? But there is a tension when your retirement planning is obviously constraining your housing needs today and is just going to kind of delay another move 3 years from now or 4 years from now, which is what you want to avoid, right? So I think it's better to think about your housing needs, not just today, but think about them over the next 4 or 5 years, and then come up with a plan for the longer term kind of horizon, rather than I'm fine with a 2-bedroom condo for now, but then, we'll worry about a bigger home, 5 years from now or 4 years from now. So I think that's kind of what we talked about. And the approach for them, what we suggested is they should start by looking at $500,000 condos and then decide for themselves if that's enough. And if it's not, you kind of inch your way up sort of the housing criteria. And then eventually maybe you start looking at, $700,000 3-bedroom townhomes, which if you do the actual math on them, like in terms of your out-of-pocket carrying costs, it's actually not going to be that much more per month, because older condos have relatively high maintenance fees, like over, say, $1,000 a month. Whereas, a $700,000 freehold townhome, for example, in the sevens, freehold meaning no condos, no maintenance fees, is not going to cost you $1,000 or $1,200 a month in maintenance fees. So you're paying a slightly higher mortgage, but you don't have that maintenance fee payment, right? And that's another thing that they're actually concerned about, and we talked about. So so they have to sort of go out and tour to see, okay, what type of home do I think I can settle into for the longer term? And then almost like revisit their finances at that time. And then they can decide, well, what is the right approach? Do I just extend my mortgage longer so I can keep my $1,500 a month towards savings? Or do I accelerate my mortgage and just reduce my retirement savings? And these are obviously all personal decisions. I can't tell them what to do, but the point is, I think it's important to have that exercise where you're educating yourself on what the market, you can see what you can get, and you can see what works for your life and your family and your budget as well.
All right. Trying to keep doing everything all at once. It's not just an almost movie name. It's the motto of my life. So I can really relate to that. I appreciate your real estate answer to where you might want to look or what types of homes. And I'm thinking, John, you would also suggest, I've heard you do that, talking to a financial planner and maybe talking about, well, if I have a slightly bigger house, I buy it now, maybe use it to raise your family. And then it may be a potential to rent out the basement or start doing things like that when you don't need as much space later on, but would like to accelerate your retirement savings, right?
Yeah, so 100%. And that's actually an avenue for even for today, quite frankly, not just for retirement. Like, when I bought my first home quite a few years ago, I remember I was in sort of the condo budget, like the 1-bedroom plus den condo kind of price range, which was a lot lower back then. And I just didn't like it. This was not the type of home I wanted to live in for the long term. So I actually spent over budget, bought a detached bungalow and rented my basement, right? And when I did the math, my actual monthly carrying costs were lower because the rental income was exceeded the increase in my mortgage payment because I kind of spent more on the detached home, right? So this is an avenue that they could even use if they buy even a slightly larger home that has a basement rental. They'd be generating income from that basement rental today. They'd have a larger home sort of on the main second floor, whatever it is, like a 3-bedroom home, than if they bought the condo. Eventually, they can take over the basement if they want to live in it, or like you said, use it in sort of their retirement as a secondary source of income. So there are so many other avenues. You're 100% right.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So, speaking of rentals, we move on to our second set of questions, a couple all grouped together from one viewer who is pointing out. I mean, I think these questions remind us, John, that renting out, people who are renting out properties right now are not having an easy time of it in the GTA, in the slowing market. So, hi, John. I enjoy listening to your show from the Caribbean and saw that you offered to answer specific questions from your viewers. I have three for you. I am a non-resident Canadian citizen, and my non-Canadian husband and I own a triplex in Canada. My daughter lives on the uppermost floor. Can we Airbnb the basement apartment? Question 2, what are the implications of our HST taxes if the basement is used as an Airbnb and then after some time the building is put up for sale? And
let's stop there before we go to the last one.
Sure. Let's start there.
So can they Airbnb it, and what are the implications on HST? Those are two important questions. So can they Airbnb the basement apartment? It depends on where you are in Canada. If you are in Ontario, which is or Toronto, I should say, where we're based, City of Toronto has restrictions on that. And many municipalities are starting to include restrictions. The federal government is including or introducing restrictions on that impact sort of the taxes regarding short-term rentals. But let's just kind of clarify what we're talking about. A short-term rental, at least in Toronto, is defined as anything that is rented for less than 28 days, right? So there are people who are renting homes on Airbnb for a whole month that are furnished rentals that are not defined as short-term rentals because they are monthly terms. Okay, that's an important distinction. But most people are renting for less than 28 days, right? Most people, when they think about Airbnb, it's truly short-term rental. Can they rent it? I mean, in a city like Toronto, technically not, because you can only rent your principal residence, number one, and you cannot rent it as a short-term rental for more than, I think it's like 180 days, roughly 6 months out of the year, right? So there are these types of restrictions on it. So do some people still do it? Do they kind of go against the rules? Some people do, but that's one's decision if they want to do that. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but because there are other costs associated with it. So to answer the question, you'd want to look at your local municipality's restrictions. I know like BC introduced restrictions recently as well. So you want to look at those. Regarding HST, this is actually a very good question. And I saw a number of accountants discussing this on Twitter recently. I mean, I'm not an accountant, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And my first piece of advice is talk to an accountant. But what I had many of them say, which was kind of new to me, was that when you file your taxes and you're using let's just forget that this is a triplex. Let's just assume it's like a condo or a single family home. When you're using it as a short-term rental, that the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, does not look at that as like a traditional rental home where the rental income is from long-term rental income. They see that as being used for commercial purposes, right? Which I was not aware of. I mean, I don't do a lot of short-term Airbnb rentals, so that was kind of news to me, and I thought it was super interesting. And what they said is for tax purposes, it is a commercial use, right? And what is the implication of that? I mean, one could be obviously that there's just HST on it when you're renting it. But more importantly, what they had said was that if you use it, say, for 2 or 3 years as a short-term rental full-time, and you file your taxes that way, and the CRA sees it as commercial, the moment that you basically convert it to a residential use, you have to basically self-assess and pay GST or HST on the value of the home when you're converting it. So let's just say the home's worth $1 million. When you convert it from a short-term rental to a long-term rental, you have to pay $130,000 in HST on that. And that's just like all out of pocket. And that's what this thread was about, like how people can get hammered by making these massive tax payments just because they're converting their homes from short-term rental to long-term rental. So again, I mean, take this with a grain of salt. Talk to your accountant. I mean, if anyone wants to add anything, and accountants want to add some comments to the video, we'll add them in the show notes. But I think the broader point is that you want to talk to an accountant about the HST implications, because you do not want to get hammered with a massive bill. In this case, because it's used as a triplex, if there was any implication, it would probably be for the portion of the home that's used as short-term rental rather than the whole property. But again, you want to get tax advice, because a lot of people get tax advice after the fact, which is the wrong way to do it. You want to be thinking about these things before you do them, to mitigate the downsides of the tax hit, basically.
All right, thank you. Now, the second part of Marianne's question, I think you've already touched on the elements, but I think it introduces the issue right now, which is that some parts of the Greater Toronto Area market are quite slow for renting out.
Yeah.
So her final question is regarding a separate house owned by a relative, and the house is being rented out. They are struggling to find a tenant right now because the rental market is so slow, and they can't afford to wait because their mortgage payments have really increased and they're struggling to make their payments. So what are the implications if they do Airbnb for a few months only during the winter months and then switch to a long-term rental in March, let's say next year, when the long-term rental market hopefully picks up again? And eventually, if they put up their house for sale, what would be the HST liability, because they'd used it for a time? I look forward to your reply and recommendations. As I said, that's regards from Marianne. Now, John, I think you covered some of it, but what happens when you're using it as, some of the time is Airbnb and sometimes long-term rental?
So, okay, I'll answer that first, but there are other issues with this question that didn't even. So, firstly, I mean that they're concerned about sort of the HST impact. Again, you need to talk to an accountant. My instinct is that it would not impact this person. Like, I don't think using it as a short-term rental for 2 or 3 months and then moving to long-term rental would fit you in this category of commercial use if it's truly for a short period of time, right? I think what we talked about earlier, and what I saw many of these accountants talk about, is if it's primarily used or exclusively used as a short-term rental, right? This is just really for a few months is what they're talking about, or 4 months, and then moving to long-term rental. So I would be surprised if there are, obviously HST impact in terms of sort of when we're thinking about the sale price or the sale value of the home. But again, talk to an accountant. I'm not an accountant. I honestly would not be able to advise on that. But beyond sort of the HST implications, there are other things that I think are important to think about. Number one is, as an owner of an investment property, you cannot just go from seamlessly converting your home to an Airbnb and then to a long-term rental. Number one is you need furniture. Like an Airbnb, you cannot rent it empty. You need beds, you need a sofa, you need cutlery, you need dishes, you need pots, and all of that stuff. So, you're not going to go out and buy that so you can, bridge this 4-month gap when you're having a hard time finding a long-term tenant, right? So it doesn't really make sense. If you have all of that stuff already, then you're looking, I guess, at moving all of that stuff out to convert it to a long-term rental. So, if you have your home fully furnished already and can rent it out, potentially. But again, the short-term rental market is also not booming now, right? Like I think everyone sees or thinks that Airbnb is like this lottery ticket. Like, if I just Airbnb my home, they hear stories. Everyone's making $200-300 a night or $400 a night. Yeah, maybe, but I think Airbnb is not that different from, especially in slow periods, January, February. Who the heck is traveling January, February, right? Those are dead months for hotels. So if you think about Airbnbs, the nicest and most beautifully staged and dolled up homes are going to be busy. Everyone else is empty. And I've heard people say this, like I know friends and different people who have had Airbnbs across the country saying the same thing. They were making so much money over the spring and summer, and now they can't, they're just dying to rent them. They're offering 2 nights for the price of one. It's so empty. So it's not necessarily a solution. I would personally, as an owner, if it was me, I would continue to market it both, for rent as a long-term rental. It is a tough time, always this time of year to rent out for long, because there's not a lot of people looking at moving. But that's just the market. I don't know if I'd be doing short-term. I would probably just wait it out, but that's just me.
What great additional considerations or primary ones, John. That's really useful.
The other thing
And
the other thing I want to add actually too is if they're because they actually mentioned something that I think it also impacted that they're planning on selling. Okay. I mean, if you're planning on selling in 2024, you should not be renting your home in March of 2024. You are going to have such a hard time to sell that property because most people buying homes now are end users. There are very few investors who wants to buy a home and to inherit your tenant, right? And even if you're selling it a year later, I mean, it's very important to think about the impact that renting out tenanted properties has. It is it actually can significantly decrease the value of your home because even if the tenant is not on a lease anymore, the year has gone and they're month to month. And in theory, a buyer can move in and give them notice because they want to take over the property. Very few buyers, like many, are reluctant to do that because they're worried the tenant's not going to move out. The tenants will sometimes hold the landlord hostage and ask for big compensation just to sell the unit vacant. So there are important considerations that I think some investors don't think about, especially we're on this cusp of I want to sell soon, but let me rent it for now. That is like a very important consideration. Like if your property's vacant, you want to sell it when it's vacant. You want to paint it, you want to stage it to maximize your price. Renting it for 6 or 9 months and then selling it, I mean, I wouldn't do it.
very key consideration. So don't underestimate the costs and the time costs and the risks of transitioning between all these forms of renting out, selling. So that's very, very useful. I'll also quickly note that the Canadian government also announced a lot of new initiatives to try and really crack down on taxation of Airbnbs. And our podcast doesn't run ads, but if you're an avid podcast listener, you will hear nothing but Airbnb ads right now. So talking to your point, John, there is obviously nothing that keeps the Airbnb market safe from a slowdown.
Exactly.
Because we're being inundated with those calls to rent out your place. So thank you for that. And thank you to Marianne for your question. Let's move on to our final question. Hi, John and Ermi. I'm currently selling my condo in Corktown in Toronto. It's a hard loft, about 600 square feet. The agent I'm working with has suggested putting it up for sale at the beginning of February for the spring market. I'm just wondering if that is a good time to sell or if I should wait based on what I read in your report, John. I'm wondering for how long it might be on the market and if I would get close to what I'm hoping for, which is $500,000. The agent suggested to list the unit at $439,000. Would waiting until the summer be better? Thank you, Josephina.
Interesting question. So, I mean, if you're planning on listing your condo, should you list in the new year or wait till the summer? I mean, it's a tricky question because a lot of it depends on when you need to move and the outlook. And I think her question was more, do I think the market's going to be better in the summer? I don't know if it will be. I mean, I think if we look at the segments of the market where there's a lot of pressure, condos is one of them. I would probably suggest listing at the beginning of the year. And not because I predict the market's going to be worse, but I don't think the market's going to be better by the summer, put it that way, right? If we look at a lot of the areas where new listings are surging, it is in the condo market. Condo market is definitely a lot slower than even the low-rise market. To some extent, like inventory is building up, fewer showings, that type of stuff. So, I mean, I would probably list it in January, February, provided that works with the homeowner, right? I would not necessarily try to time it and wait till the summer because I mean, I don't necessarily. The summer's generally slower, anyways. It's not an ideal time. Like, the spring market's usually busier, and the spring market usually the best time is January, February. It's the lowest inventory. Usually, demand is strong because people start their spring search in January, February. There usually aren't a ton of listings. So I would probably even list in January rather than February. Regarding the timing and the value, I mean, it's a very hard question. Like niche properties might sell relatively quickly if there's something unique about it. Other ones take long, and again, I think part of it depends on how you're priced. I mean, $500,000 for a 600 square foot unit does not sound like a high price to me. You know what I mean? So it seems very reasonable. I mean, I don't know the building, obviously, but again, I mean, this idea of should you list low, which is, I think, what this real estate agent advised, this is, I'll say, a terrible approach. Okay, number one, for a couple of reasons. Number one, the condo market's incredibly slow right now. I think it is a bit hopeful and optimistic to think you're going to get a bidding war on a condo. I mean, you might, right? Depending on the unit, if it's very unique. I don't want to criticize the agent. It might be possible, but when I say it's a bad idea, it's because you can't make those decisions in November, right? You make those decisions the 2 weeks before you list based on what else is on the market, what the inventory like, what are the volumes like, what are the sales like, have any other units like yours received bidding wars, what is going on in the market, right? So you don't decide your pricing strategy 3-4 months before you list. You decide the week or 2 weeks before you list based on the trends in your local market. If there's 5 other condos exactly like yours in your area that you're competing with that have been sitting on the market for 60 days, why are you going to list with an offer night? Like, it's not going to work if they're just sitting on the market and not selling. So that's kind of what I mean. Like, you can't make those decisions from now. You have to kind of decide in the moment when you're about to list.
All right, that is super helpful. And I guess, John, closing thought is that we are not in the days of listing low to attract bidding wars.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's definitely not that market. Even the homes, like you'd think like the family homes that there's so few of that are dolled up and beautiful, like even those on offer nights, some of them that would have had 10 offers 6 months ago are getting 2 or 1 or 3 and aren't selling for crazy prices. So it's not, you want to be very cautious if you're listing low. Like, you want to think you have the type of property that should sell and get a lot. And there are some, even with condos, there are some that fit that description. If you're not that, then I would just list and wait. And to your question about how long it's going to take, I think it depends on the property and the inventory. And you'll get a very good idea of how long based on the current inventory in the market in your area that's similar to your type of property. That'll give you some clues about how long it's going to take, how many sales have happened. But it could take a little bit of time.
Thank you, John. And regular followers of John's monthly market report and his live update on our YouTube channel, and which we also broadcast on our podcast, would know that the market is now in a slower time. Like Josephina is a follower of that report. She noted that. So I will make sure that the links to your latest report and that live session, which is open to everybody that would like to join, it happens once a month, are in our show notes. So invite everyone to join along to that if they're not already. And all that's left is for me to thank all of our viewers and listeners, and especially those who have sent in their questions. Please keep them coming. John, your Twitter handle and your email.
Very easy. Ask at John Pasalis on Twitter and ask John at movesmartly.com. Please send us your questions. We love getting them and obviously answering them every month.
Great. And contact info for the show is also in the show notes. And we will see you soon at not the same time, but around the same time.
Next year, probably in January with this episode. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Thank you.